Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. I want to talk to you tonight about education in California. California has a reputation for implementing just about any and every leftist, pro-homosexual, pro-abortion agenda you can imagine in their schools. Even back when Schwarzenegger was governor, the state required that schools teach only, quote, a positive, end of quote, view of homosexuality, preventing teachers from informing students of the obvious health risks, the possibility of a horrible death as a result of engaging in this behavior. It doesn't come to everyone, but it can come. Can't come through the normal kinds of sexual behavior. Only comes through the aberrant forms, because the body's not designed for this. The state's moves in recent years have been even worse, banning counselors from helping students who want to rid themselves of unwanted same-sex attractions. It's why so many parents have chosen Christian schools for their children. But now the state is targeting that last remaining stronghold for faith and freedom. And the Pacific Justice Institute is fighting back in a lawsuit brought by Riverview Christian Academy in rural Northern California. The school was hit with a SWAT-style raid prompted by an internet rumor put forward by an online left-wing tabloid. There were no phone calls to the school saying, "We'd like to come and take a look." There was just this SWAT-style raid that descended upon them. The allegation was that the school, quote, housed illegal drugs, stockpiled weapons, and was preparing for an end times apocalypse. Now, the question becomes, on what planet would law enforcement accept this accusation out of hand? But that's apparently what the California Highway Patrol did. The state ordered a raid that included 16 armed law enforcement personnel from the California Highway Patrol and 2 canine units, along with 17 social workers. It was an unannounced assault against a boarding school that terrified the students and the staff. And it turned up no evidence. But the state was not finished. It was only the first wave in the state's attack. Instead of apologizing for its dangerous blunder, kids could have got hurt. The state doubled down and began imposing daily fines against the school for allegedly operating as an unlicensed community care facility. Now, Riverview Christian Academy has actually operated as a private school for the last 25 years, filing an annual affidavit with the California Department of Education, as do other private schools and home schools in the state. What this means is the state knew of this school and should have known what was going on there. I started and ran a Christian school in my church back in the 80s. We had local government officials come into our school and look over our records to make sure we were keeping them correctly. I invited them in. They wanted to come. I said, "No, come on. Set them up in my office. Entertain them. Not afraid of the state. We're not doing anything wrong." That was back in the 80s in New Jersey. Those people wanted to know what was going on in schools in their community. What's wrong with California? The state is now, however, taking the position that due to recent legislation, it's no longer possible for a private boarding school to operate without extensive licensing and oversight by the Department of Social Services. Where have they been for the last 20 years? But licensing is more than just an administrative headache. It would require the Christian school to relinquish its moral standards. Now, under the licensing, they have to operate the way the state wants to operate, not the way they want to. For instance, the state requires that licensed facilities allow students to have the right to engage in spiritual and sexual exploration. That phrase all by itself contradicts the goals of the school and the parents who enroll their children in this sort of school in the first place. The school sued, but a federal judge complained that it hadn't gone through the state's process first. But when the state school sued the school, it was pointed out that the state had abandoned its administrative routine in order to sue the school. And apparently that's okay. The lawyer for the school said, in 25 years of practice, I have never seen this level of aggressive, militant, and ideologically driven conduct by a state agency against a religious institution. He went on to say, for years, as the public schools have become increasingly hostile toward parents, the courts have insisted that the parent's option is to instead choose private education. Now that fundamental right is also under attack. Parents who do not believe they can send their children to public schools. Who would those parents be? I took my children out of the public school in the mid-1970s, no, in the late 1970s, because of the nonsense that was going on, immoral stuff. But just about every other state in the union is applying many of these same limitations. And they're doing it for the same reasons. They're not trying to make education better, they're trying to put schools out of business. Underneath, behind all of this, is the enemy of our souls. No rational human being would wake up one morning and decide they were a different gender. Nor would they attempt to have sexual intercourse using orifices not equipped to handle it. And should they try, finding the physical pain and the damage and the disease that comes with it, they'd stop if they were sane. But in America, even churches are now supporting this sort of behavior. And the question becomes, where did it come from? It could only come from the very pit of hell. And of course, how did we get there? We got there by destroying the basic building block of society, the family. Destroying the bond of matrimony with no-fault divorces. Destroying the power of the family by sending mothers out to work. Destroying the influence of the church by making church whatever you want it to be. Can you say the charismatic movement? In the end, the family was changed forever. Parental authority no longer exists. Parental imprinting is not being done. There is no more respect for parental authority, largely because it isn't there. It only took 4 generations to make this happen. The baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the Generation Y, or Generation Next. Baby boomers didn't know what to do. Mom had gone to work. But other than having more money, they weren't too different from their predecessors. But the seeds were sown. And not having those roots in anything important, not having those connections with the generations that had come before, these parents now were easy prey to the social activists who wanted to tear down our institutions. They attacked the government for sending boys to Vietnam. Never before had America gone to war with such ambivalence. We don't even call it a war. 10 plus years, over 50,000 deaths, and we accomplished nothing. We left with our tail between our legs, happy to simply get out. But the legacy remains in the damaged people. Our young adults discovered serious drugs. We had marijuana back in the 50s. But what these boys found in Vietnam was so much more. We also learned not to care. Fighting and dying for the same real estate over and over sucked the heart out of this whole generation. And that was the fact that no uniformed army existed with which to fight. The person you drank with last night in the bar might be the person trying to kill you this morning. The story is told about a young boy sitting on a water buffalo at a patrol that goes out every morning, walking by this scene and seeing this boy on this buffalo. And then one morning, as they walk out, the lieutenant, sergeant, whoever was in charge, pulls out his pistol and shoots the boy. Outrage! You just shot a little child. The story goes on to say that was the first day that patrol did not get ambushed. That was the enemy they were facing. It tore the heart out of these men. And the demonstrations at home destroyed our respect for government. The idealism native to all young people was destroyed. Cynicism took over, and with it a lack of zeal. I mean, what difference did it make anymore? This is the generation that raised children but did not nurture them. This is also the generation that introduced abortion, later abortion on demand. A generation that introduced hard drugs and church without divine impetus. An entire generation raised on television and the internet, with total strangers providing the patterns and the values these young people would mimic. The Gen Xers were also called baby busters due to their exaggerated lifestyle. 2 adults and 2 children in a family, all living their own lives almost independent of one another. Maybe the adults are married, probably they're not. Their paths crossing once or twice a day with very little conversation, no deliberate parenting, meaning patterning in decent behavior, things that will set you up for success. That was that generation. There were exceptions, but not near enough. Today, most young people get their values from the internet. 84% of young people aged 18 to 24 get their information from the internet. The old folks, 40 to 60 years of age, still get their information from television. But television today is very, very different. There's no more I Love Lucy. There's no more Father Knows Best. To say our culture is fragmented is an understatement. People you know and or work with are not like you, generally. They may be at work, but what they do outside of work is who they really are. And the young people I've seen and worked with are wild at heart. They are thinking outside the box. Their values are sensual and their emotions are almost limitless. Almost anyone under the age of 40 is still living like the teenagers I saw in the 1960s and 70s. Divorce is routine if you get married. Abortion is normal. Foul language goes without saying. And all of this in the home. These people tend towards selfism and social abandonment. Why? Largely due to a lack of parental training, a lack of parental patterning in what is right and good and healthy and helpful. They live in a world of self where only what impacts them really matters. And they have plenty of media to reinforce their isolated, exaggerated social standards. And we ask ourselves, when will all of this change? When will it get better? And the answer comes back, never. The Bible tells us that human beings will continue to get morally and socially worse until Jesus comes. We did not know how bad that was. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 3, evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. But you, the Christian, the person who cares about God and good and decency and all the rest of it, you continue in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them, and that from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. Because all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, teaching, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. We are here only to serve God as an example. That we fail so miserably is a testimony to our earthly, sinful condition. That God is still able to work his program, even through us, is a testimony to his faithfulness. Not always ours.